Hello, and welcome to this, our 58th live stream. 58 is the luckiest number ever. Okay, I should explain the origins of that. That is actually a quote from SpongeBob SquarePants. I don't actually watch SpongeBob SquarePants. However, I do have to admit, sometimes they come up with these crazy, quirky lines that are just so quotable. And today's 58 is the luckiest number ever. It was just irresistible to use as a title on our live stream. So, I want to wish everyone here a happy Canada Day for those of you who are Canadian. And in a couple days is I see that Dr. Folk is more cultured than I thought. Well, how cultured did you think I was? In a few days, it'll also be July 4th, and I want to wish a happy July 4th also to our American viewers. A little few days ahead of time, but still great thing to celebrate. So, I think we've got the preliminaries out of the way here. The live stream is the same as always in the respect that we're going to take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. We do ask if you are, if you give a super chat, then super chats have priority. If you're not giving a super chat, then we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question, so I know that's being directed to me and not somebody else in the live chat. I don't actually have software that scans the live chat, so I actually have to scan it with, my eyes. So I look for that Q in the colon, and if that Q in the colon, I just pass by it. So the other thing is we have gotten really, really sticky about the ask your question only once rule. Okay, we've had a couple people who've just sort of abused, spam their question over and over and over again, and we're not tolerating that anymore. So ask your question only once. Of course, if you spam it as a super chat, then we don't mind. We don't care then. We'll just keep thanking you at that point. But if you're not giving us a super chat and you want your question noticed, the best way is to not spam it. Okay? We also ask that if it's a verse regards a verse in the Bible or a foreign word that you ask, you give us either the book, chapter, and verse where it appears. Or what language you think it is and what you think it means, just to give us a little bit of context so we know what you're actually talking about. So, with that said, let's get into this. And we're going to start off with 4 non-super chats. And we will start here. Our first one here is actually from Jacob Testa. And he says, "Hey, Dr. Folk. What makes Jesus different from other religious figures like Muhammad, Buddha, Joseph Smith, Abraham, Moses, or any of the others, because they all pretty much seem the same to me?" All right, that's a fair question. What makes him different is a couple things. The claims, comes down to claims, and how he provided evidence for those claims. Now, I have to admit, I'm an evidentialist. I follow the evidence wherever it leads. Now, what you have here is you have a list here of religious leaders that are not, even in the ones that you say are all the same, they're not the same. Muhammad, Buddha, and Joseph Smith are very different than Abraham and Moses. All right? So, to be very, very blunt about that, Abraham and Moses laid the foundation for what came later, at least in the Judeo-Christian faith. Muhammad was somebody who came in after, and really was, there's no really nice way of saying this, but differs radically in perspective from, say, Jesus Christ. Joseph Smith was a charlatan. Hate to say it, but yeah, he was a charlatan. Buddha was from a completely different point of view altogether. Now, all of those men, all five of those figures, Muhammad, Buddha, Joseph Smith, Abraham, and Moses, were men. And they were only men. They only claimed to be men. Jesus Christ is different from all of those because he was a man who claimed to be God also. Now, we have to understand that any turkey off the street can claim to be God. Okay? But can you show that that claim is warranted? And this is where Jesus Christ differs from the others. The others claim to be just men. So they basically qualify themselves to be men and nothing more. Jesus Christ claims to be a man who is also God. So there's a bigger claim and a higher bar there that has to be met. So what makes Jesus Christ different is through his life, he came to show that he is God incarnate, that his mission was to die for the sins of mankind, the seminal problem of the Judeo-Christian faith, and to rise again from the dead to conquer death itself. So that's what makes Jesus different. You know, he feeds the 5,000. He performs a major miracle, and he does it several times. These food miracles are replete in Jewish history, like, for example, the manna. I mean, that feeding of the 5,000 is essentially the manna miracle. Jesus walking on water is essentially the water magic that we find, for example, the prophets doing. So he's got control over the elements. He can calm a storm. He can tell a storm to cease, and it does. And then he does the ultimate miracle, which is to raise himself from the dead. And 500 people see it. They witness it. The disciples witness it. The apostles witness it. And then they're willing to die based upon that belief. It's a marked difference. It's a really marked difference. It's not comparable at all. It's apples and oranges. Comparing Jesus to those others is completely apples and oranges. So, anyway, the long and the short of it is Muhammad, Buddha, Joseph Smith is basically trying to tell you how to be good enough for God. That's their mission, is to basically to say you have to work your way up to God. Jesus Christ is God coming down to man. And he does the work. He provides the salvation. It's God saving us, not us saving ourselves. So, I hope that explains it. Thank you very much for that question. And it's a worthy question. It's a question worth asking. All right, our next super chat, non-super chat, is from Warrior of the Most High, and he asks, it's a question that I've been thinking about for a long time now. What happened to your Spotify channel? Ooh. Okay. Now, we never actually had a Spotify channel. What we had was an Anchor FM channel, which is actually now owned by Spotify. We were bait and switched. Okay? We were bait and switched. Anchor FM promised that if we provided content to Anchor FM, that they would monetize that content. And what happened was they just said, oh, you're Canadian. We can't give you any money. We'll put ads on your channel, but we won't give you any money back. I was like, Um, yeah, that's not how this thing works. Unfortunately, the Canadian. I mean, I don't know why this is such a problem for podcasts. I mean, it isn't a problem for say video streaming. You know, you can choose any number of video streaming services and get easily monetized. But for some reason, the Canadian market, streaming services don't like monetizing you. You could do this in the United States, no problem. If we were living in the United States, this would be no issue at all. We could find half a dozen streaming services that would monetize our streaming content for podcasts. You just can't find that in Canada. Reason number 560 to hate Canada on Canada Day. I'm sorry, I'm keeping track of all these reasons why I hate Canada so much. Yes, I am Canadian. I live in Vancouver. I was born Canadian, but I have a lot of reasons to hate Canada. I'm sorry if that offends any of my other Canadian viewers, but wow. Yeah, you have several strikes against you if you're in Canada, and this is just one of them. This is just one of them. Is you can't get a podcast streaming service monetized, not easily. So you know, I just have to say is that I mean, I was in talks with Anchor FM at one point, and they said that they had big plans to monetize their Canadian podcast streams. That was back in like around this year, actually, this time last year, so in 2021, and you know said they were gonna make a huge announcement that their Canadian podcasts were going to be monetized also. It never materialized. Nothing came of it. So basically, for us to do that extra work, and it's actually a lot of extra work. If we do that extra work, we want to make sure that there's some sort of, that we're not paying them for content, essentially. So if we end up paying them for content, that's just a sort of that's a negative for us. That's an expense, and really not a great expense. If they provide the hosting for free, we'd probably do it. But most of the streaming services in Canada right now are pay to play. You have to pay them to host your content. And really? I mean, you're making ad revenue and you want us to pay you? No. Sorry, don't think so. So that answers why we have not continued doing the Anchor FM podcasts. We'd love to. We'd really love to take these live streams and convert them into streams, into podcasts. Because I think it's a format that would work very well in podcasts. But we just don't. There's just not an appropriate streaming service that's available that we can access from Canada that would do that in a way that wouldn't break the bank. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. It's a good question, but unfortunately, those are one of those plans that went to heck in a handbasket. Our next super chat comes from Grant Gooch. He says, "Do you agree with the translation of?" Here's my bad eyesight coming into play. Yetza'u Yeledha. Again, this is really small font on my screen, so I have a really. I'm of that age now where I almost need reading glasses. So in Exodus 21:22 as miscarry, also in Numbers 5:25 as will miscarry. I've heard that Exodus 21 refers to premature birth, literally make the child come out, and Numbers 5 is more appropriately translated as thigh or I guess lower abdomen. Okay, well let's look at the text. So I am going to pull up here. Exodus 21. 22. Okay. All right. Now, the context of this passage is two men who are fighting. Not that that ever happens. Verse 22, and if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a, and here's where the statement here, yatsa yaled ka comes out, and yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay. So the Hebrew here literally says, and I will grab the Hebrew right. Let's see here. Vayetsu, Yaladeha. All right. So, quite literally, cause to be brought out in childbirth. Okay? So, this is not a miscarriage, even though it is often translated as miscarriage. This is basically, she goes into labor. Okay? Two men fight, one man hits the woman, and it causes her to go into labor. Okay? So she goes into labor. Now, the key to understanding this passage here is that, but there is no further injury. So that's the key here. There's no further injury. Baby's okay, mother's okay. Then we're just dealing here with a simple assault. Okay? And essentially, this is case law to basically show that, hey, guy pulls back to pop the other guy and elbows the wife, and she goes into labor, and she has a perfectly normal childbirth. Okay? But if there's any other injury, okay, then the lex talionis takes over. And then it becomes life for life. Like, for example, he draws back, he hits the woman, and she dies. All right. He's dead too. Okay. He's killed the wife, he's dead also. If he pops out her eye, his eye gets removed. He knocks a tooth out. His tooth gets knocked out. It's lex talionis at that point. But that's a limiting factor of justice here. Doesn't go beyond that. So if he knocks out her tooth, they can't just chop off his hand. There's a limit there. So that's what's going on in Exodus 21. Is it's not about miscarriage. It's not about the death of a child. It's about premature childbirth. And I think that's really clear from sort of the wording of the Hebrew here. Now, Numbers. Let's see here. Let's take a look at Numbers 5 here. Numbers 5:22. Okay, now this is a little different. This happens. This is a ritual here. What's going on here? And there's actually we actually discussed this passage once in a previous live stream, and it's talking about this is actually not talking about miscarriage at all. Okay. This is talking about an oath. Now, a husband is jealous and suspects a woman of a wife of cheating. Okay? Suspects the wife of cheating. And they go to the priest, and she takes an oath, a sacred oath, that she wasn't cheating. And the woman, drinks something, and essentially, if the woman is essentially sterile, if this results in sterility, making your thigh waste away and your abdomen swell. Essentially, she starts getting a kind of sterility. Then it's that point it's seen as that is the judgment that's happened to a woman who has basically cheated but didn't get caught in the person. So there's no other. Basically there's no other. There's no other There's no other judicial ramifications that happen after. But barrenness is seen as a source of shame in the ancient world. So she becomes in a sense a public spectacle. The signs of her sterility are obvious. And because she took this public oath, that everyone saw and everyone remembers, you've got her. You see, she's sort of, been hoisted by her own petard, as it were. Okay, so again, this passage is not about miscarriage. This passage is about a wife that's cheating, and a man who takes her to the priest to present her to God to say, okay, confess it or deny it. Judgment will be on your head instead. Okay? So it's a very different passage. It's a very different context. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, but the two passages are very, very different here. Okay. Our next question comes from Cataphract 3. And he says, were ancient Egyptians known for being prudish or hedonistic when it came to their love life? Oh. Yeah. Yeah. They weren't prudish. Not in any way. Marriage in ancient Egypt was a revolving door. Infidelity was rife with both sexes. Infidelity among men was rife. Infidelity among women was rife. Just straight across the board, infidelity was rife. So it was very, very common. It was really, really common for men in ancient Egypt and women to have multiple lovers in a lifetime. So, now, with that said, there were certain sexual practices that were taboo. Okay? Let's just say that practices that would be accepted today amongst the alphabet community would not have gone over very well in ancient Egypt. It was not a society that was accepting of, say, homosexual practices, and some of that had to do with the fact that that was listed in, say, the negative confession as a practice you didn't do. It was also associated with the god Seth for some reason. We don't know exactly why, but it was associated with him as well. So those practices were taboo. They were taboo. There's some minor indications that it did happen, like it does in any society, but they were not practices that were by any means condoned society-wise. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. And yeah, they were not prudes, not in any way, shape, or form. They were very sexually liberated. Okay, let's get to our super chats. Our first super chat comes from Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. What measuring system was used by Israel before and after the Exodus? Reliable source that records weight and measures and change over time in the Bible. Okay. We don't have a large number of sources for weights and measures. Now, we do know, for example, we do know some of the weights that were used in, say, ancient Egypt. For example, like, for example, measuring distance. You have the cubit. Now, you had, in Egypt, you had the standard cubit, you had the royal cubit, and you had the divine cubit. They're roughly 18 inches, 21 inches, and 24 inches, respectively. Israel retains the standard cubit as its length of measure. So, roughly a foot and a half. That was used both in Egypt and in Israel proper. And that was sort of the unit of measure throughout the much of the ancient Near East. Now, you also had what was called a span. And a span is roughly the distance across your hand, and it's roughly 4 inches. On most people, I'll try to point this, the distance between one side and the other side is roughly 4 inches. You're ever without a ruler? There's you have a 4-inch measuring tool right on your person. Okay? That's a span. And people use that for, say, lesser units of measure. So sometimes you'll see, for example, 2 cubits and then 2 spans. So essentially that's 36 inches plus an extra 8. You also had, say, measurements of liquid measures such as the hin. Again, used in both nations. But you also had some measures in of, say, currency as well, weight of metals, and those were different between, say, Egypt and Israel. Israel tended to use the shekel, and we do have some indication of the shekel happening before the Exodus in the Levant, and into, say, Mesopotamia. Whereas the Egyptians used the deben, a much sort of heavier weight than the shekel. I think the shekel is, I believe it's roughly half an ounce, but I'm not sure. The deben's about 20 ounces. And then you've got, like, the cot, which is a measure of grain. Again, used in Egypt, but not necessarily in Israel. I don't remember off the top of my head what Israel uses as the measure of grain. I don't know if they just call it a sack or what, but I know that there's a standard measured for grain in Egypt. So anyway, that's a rough overview of the measures as best I know them off the top of my head. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I hope that answered your question to some satisfaction. But it's actually, if you want to know more about the Egyptian units of measure, at least as far as weight, as far as currency goes, I would recommend Jock J. Jansen's book on this, which is, I think it's The Economics of the Ramesside Period. It's an excellent sort of beginner's book on the economics of the Ramesside, and he goes into all these weights for currency and grain, etc. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat comes from John Morton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. In 2 Samuel 12:23, David remarks with the loss of the child, saying, "I will go to him." Is he saying he will join him in the grave, or something more hopeful, thinking that they will be reunited? Okay, let's just pull that up. Always a good idea to pull this up. And we'll take it in its context. We'll just go back to the verse 22. And he said, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me, that the child may live. But now he has died, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me." Okay, Now, it's a really, really difficult thing when anyone loses a child. You know, it was no less difficult for King David than any parent. But what he's basically talking about here is that essentially there's nothing he can do at this point to bring his child back from the grave. His child has died. That's a watershed moment. It's a moment that he can't take back. So, at that point, there's nothing more he can do. No fasting, no weeping will bring this child back. So, at that point, what he's basically saying is that there's only one other direction that this can go, which is he joins him. Whether that's in Sheol, the grave, or whether it's, a reunion in the afterlife. The text here isn't clear. And both could be true here. He could be both thinking that, okay, yes, I am going to eventually die and join him in Sheol. Or he may have conceived this as Sheol being the afterlife of the dead. Now, I do want to make a specific comment about this because I think there's a lot of exegetes here that go off the tracks, go off the rails, saying that the Israelites didn't believe in an afterlife. I think that's so wrong it isn't even funny. I know that there were certain Sadducees that seem to have thought that, but that's an exceptionally uncommon view for any nation, any civilization ever. Okay? It would be really, really remarkable if all of Israel, especially given it's all the surrounding nations, didn't believe in an afterlife of some kind. So, I really, really think here that what we're seeing here is the idea that David is thinking that someday, he's going to die, he's going to go to the grave and join his son there. What that looks like is up to much speculation, unfortunately. But I also think that even the ancient Israelites held to a form of belief of life after death. And I think David is alluding to that life after death. As I said, it would be incredibly remarkable if they didn't have some vision of life after death, especially coming out of Egypt. I mean, the Egyptians were all about life after death. They pretty much lived for the afterlife, with their elaborate...
Everything.
Yeah, in Egypt, everything was about the afterlife. So, I think the Israelites had some idea of an afterlife. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. The text isn't exactly clear, but I think this is an allusion to an afterlife and a reunion of some kind. So thank you very much. Really appreciate the super chat. Okay. Our next super chat comes from Cataphract3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts on the date of the Book of Jasher and why wasn't it preserved? I'm not talking about the two forgeries. Okay. Well, we do have to recognize that there are two forgeries, floating around out there. But I don't think we have a lot of indication as to the Book of Jasher or its dates, at least the real one. I don't even remember. Yeah, there it is. So, the biblical reference to the Book of Jasher comes from Joshua chapter 10, verse 13. Let's pop it up here. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the Book of Jasher? and the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. Okay. Why wasn't it preserved? Because we don't know. Some books mentioned in the Old Testament were not preserved. We don't know why. Scholars have speculated that, say, of the roughly 2 million books of the ancient world, less than 1% survived. Okay? And this estimate is based upon, say, retrievals of, say, fragments of works that we've gotten, like, for example, at Oxyrhynchus. For example, the poet Sappho of Lesbos. She had a rather small corpus that was passed down through history. And that corpus was really quite good. Her poetry was really excellent. But it was remarkably a small corpus. It wasn't that many poems. Well, when they started doing the recovering the papyri at Oxyrhynchus, we started finding a lot more poems that were claimed by Sappho of Lesbos. A lot more poems. And they weren't very good. To put it kindly, they were kind of cringe. In the case of Sappho, it was really the good poetry that survived. The bad poetry kind of just didn't get copied and didn't get passed down, so it just was never preserved. We see this even like with hymns. There was a huge amount of hymns from the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, even the 19th century, that were written down. We're also now seeing that not a lot of those hymns are being preserved. They are not being copied in new hymnals. And some of them are just because, well, they suck. Or they're weird. Let me give you an example. There was a period of time when I was going to what's it called now? Plymouth Brethren Church. I was part of a Plymouth Brethren Church for a while. And there was a hymn that was sung in the meditative service. And it was called The Fountains of Blood. And it really talked about a fountain of blood, the blood of Jesus Christ. But it was really strange. I talked to one of the older members of the Plymouth Brethren congregation who's just recently passed away. He was in his 90s already. He was in his 90s. And he remembered this hymn as a child. And it didn't seem strange to him. But I had just gotten off of playing a video game. Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Now, if you play that game, you go to this demonic realm and you see these fountains of blood in the video game. And it's meant to disturb. So when I heard this hymn, that's the picture I had in my brain of this video game. Because a fountain of blood is so removed from my experience that this hymn was strange. Really, really odd and weird. And if you think about it, even without the video game context, it's still a strange hymn. At least to modern sensibilities. Because we don't talk about, like, for example, being washed in the blood of Christ. What, are you going into a shower and being immersed in a blood shower? Is this like a Alfred Hitchcock film? It's just... No. That's not what this means, but it's an analogy and it's a figure of speech that's no longer didn't date well. It didn't age well. So we find that a lot of hymns and a lot of things weren't being preserved in our modern times, in our early modern period, because of that sort of thing. Likewise, a lot of the stuff like the Book of Jasher, like, say, some of the other pseudepigraphal books that we got the names of but didn't survive, like some of the Gnostic Gospels, same deal. Some of the Gnostic Gospels, we had no surviving copies that were copied through antiquity until the Nag Hammadi library. Their names are recorded in the Church Fathers, and having read some of them at last, you can see why they didn't survive. They're just plain darn strange. They're just weird. So, that's why some of this stuff didn't survive. It just, people didn't see. I mean, a certain amount of people have to make copies of these things to survive, because parchment, paper, they're ephemeral. Papyrus is very ephemeral. These books last for 100 years and then they're destroyed, generally, unless they happen to be survived under extraordinary circumstances, such as being buried in a hole under a monastery or in jar clays in caves. Those are extraordinary circumstances. Most books don't get that treatment. So that's typically why these things don't survive. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's preservation of the text is a really, really interesting subject. And a lot of it just comes down to who cared about preserving what. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat comes from, is that our last super chat of this? Yes, it is. Okay. We're actually on to then the Twidget ones. Okay. And okay, here because okay, it looks like something get lost here. Yes, it looked like some stuff got lost. Stop and restart this again. Okay, well, I'm going to have to take some screenshots here because some super chats got lost. So, do these one at a time. Just a moment, peoples. Okay, our next super chat is from the Camelot Bird for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom, Dr. and Mrs. Falk. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. Does the death of David and Bathsheba's first son contradict Deuteronomy 24:16? Now let's take a look at 24:6. It does help for these contradictions to tell me how you think it contradicts too, by the way. Because sometimes we don't actually, one viewer can see a contradiction where somebody else doesn't. So it's not always clear to, say, me, why it might contradict. So answering these contradiction questions can be a little difficult because of that. So sometimes a little more context is a bit helpful here. Okay. And the text says, and we'll start at verse 15. You shall give him his wages on his day before the sun sets. This is talking about workers, for he is poor and sets his heart on it. So this is probably not part of the context. Fathers shall not be put to death for their sons, nor sons be put to death for their fathers. Everyone shall be put to death for his own sin. Okay. Now, it's not a contradiction. It's a consequence. A consequence. The problem when we talk about, say, for example, David and Bathsheba's son, is, first of all, it is the fruit of infidelity. It is the fruit of infidelity. That was a definite no-no. Second of all, it was murder. Okay, Uriah being sent to the front line several times to, here's a soldier that was nothing but loyal to David, and he rewarded that loyalty with, murder. There had to be some consequence, even for the king here. Now, the king can't punish himself. He's the ruler. So punishment has to come from God. Okay? There has to be a consequence for this. And the Deuteronomy 24:15 is essentially a prescription given to men. This is a prescription given to men. So men are told that, okay, you have a case here where a father has committed an bad act, you shan't take it out on the son. Likewise, if the son goes and commits adultery and murder, you can't take it out on the father. Okay? So this is a limitation of justice within the theocratic state of Israel. However, we have to also kind of understand, too, that who's the administrator of this theocratic state? Typically, it's going to be the magistrates, it's going to be the judges, and it's going to be the king himself. The king himself is, in a sense, above justice. And that's always been the problem with having a king, is if he sins, if he commits crimes, there's no way to punish him. There's no way to punish him. But in order for a theocratic state to maintain order, he also has to be culpable. He has to be culpable for a theocratic state to have cohesion. So we're looking here at two different contexts, essentially. We have a context here in Deuteronomy 24 where basically, for your average, person on the street, okay, you wouldn't punish, the father for the son's crimes or the sons for the father's crimes. But in the case of David and Bathsheba, there is sort of extraordinary circumstances here. Now, no one here would say, punish Jesse for David's sins. Okay? The life and death of the firstborn, though, there was still a, something had to be done here. There had to be some consequences. The prophet basically went up to him and said, hey, this is what you've done. Prophet Nathan said, hey, you did a great injustice here. Great injustice. The whole kingdom sees it. What you did here was completely outrageous. God's gonna demand that, there's going to be a recompense. Justice will be served. Justice has to be served. And there might have been another way to do it, but, David ran afoul of God a few times here and had to pay a few consequences. When he takes a census against the will of God. He's given a choice. Have men pursue you for 7 months, or famine that kills many people for, I think it was 7 years, and he picks other people to die in his place. Wasn't the most noble of selections of punishment. This is something that actually had to hit him personally. It had to hit him personally. And as king, he's pretty untouchable. Pretty untouchable. So I don't think there's a lot of consequences here that a lot of alternatives that would have sort of hit him where it hurt. And that's the point of a punishment. Is it's supposed to hurt, so you don't do it again. I don't think this is a contradiction because again, this is not the law. Keepers. Judges are not going to King David and saying, "Hey, we're going to punish your son." This is the ultimate judge, and the guy who gave the laws, and seeing the extraordinary circumstances involved here. So, and there might be people who still think that this is a contradiction, but then again, at that point, you're starting to mix contexts, and if you start to mix contexts, you can make anything contradict itself. So, anyway, that's my opinion on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And that's where I think we stand on that. So, okay. And next super chat, I'm gonna have to clip this because again, my Twidget misbehaved. So, let's do. Our next super chat is again from the Camel Leopard for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Almost forgot. Happy Canada Day. Well, thank you very much. It wouldn't be very Canadian to be patriotic about Canada Day, but if you're Canadian, you know what that means. Canadians almost see being patriotic as being unseemly. I don't know why. It's just something that's really peculiar about Canadians. I have never had a problem with thinking with being patriotic. Although I've never been terribly patriotic about Canada. But it does seem to have a sort of an unseemly savor to it. But we do celebrate Canada Day. There was some fireworks last night. But, we tend to be a little more subdued about, say, the patriotism. A lot of new citizens get sworn in on Canada Day, so to any new citizens that happen to be listening, congratulations. And thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate that. Okay. And I gotta take another snapshot here. Okay. Okay, we got a $20 super chat from Carmel Crunk. Thank you very much for that super chat. Really appreciate that. Please give me the breakdown of the differences between Egyptians and Nubians. Okay. There's several differences between Egyptians and Nubians. The first difference is actually geographic. Nubians basically inhabit the region south of the Second Cataract in Egypt and Sudan. So, once you're into Sudan, that's where you start hitting the territory of the Nubians. Okay, now, when you talk about, say, the geography of ancient Egypt, you have, say, the Theban nome. Nome is a term for province. And then you hit sort of that first cataract. Between the first and second cataract, you've got, say, Kush. So it generally goes Egypt, so moving from north to south. It's Egypt, particularly Thebes, then Cush, and then Nubia. Okay. Now, ethnographically, they are different people. Egyptians are typically more what would be called a Hamido-Semitic people. So they tend to be lighter skinned. They have more genetically related to, say, Semitic peoples across, say, the northern Mediterranean and into Canaan than, say, the Nubians. The Nubians are more genetically related to sub-Saharan Africans. Now, culturally, there are also some marked differences, but there's also a merging too. Now, the problem is we don't know that much about Nubians, say, prior to the 25th dynasty. The Nubian culture, we do know that during Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Egypt had conquered Nubia and had set it up as a viceroy, essentially. And they had a governor that ruled over Nubia during its Middle and New Kingdoms. During Dynasty 25, the tables turn. Tables are flipped. And Nubia conquers Egypt. This is really an interesting period in Egyptian history. Because you have Nubians basically going, well, the Egyptians lost because they lost their Egyptianness. So we're going to be more Egyptian than the Egyptians. And during Dynasty 25, the Nubians start building pyramids. They start building pyramids. And their kings start dressing like Egyptian kings, but instead of having, say, on the foreheads, the vulture and then the Uraeus, they had two Uraeus. Basically, the Uraeus being sort of the goddess that spit out fire. So instead of having a single weapon on their head, they had a double shotgun instead. So the Nubians were more martial, more war-oriented. And they were very successful at it. During the 25th dynasty, they managed to practically retake everything that Thutmose III took. So they had managed to conquer all the way up to practically the Orontes. So a very exceptionally interesting dynasty. Now, after Dynasty 25 fell, and the final king of Dynasty 25, Taharqa, actually died during his retreat from the Assyrians. The Nubians continued on having their own kingdom. They were never conquered again by the Egyptians or anyone else. Not until much later, into the medieval period. But they managed to retain their identity and became the kingdom of Meroe, and had their own culture that went into, say, the Common Era, the Anno Domini era. So they pretty much maintained a cohesive culture, and actually still, amazingly, still continue to build pyramids into the 1st century AD. I mean, astounding. Now, these are not big pyramids. Some of them are really small. I mean, some of these pyramids are like 6 feet tall. But Sudan, most people don't know this, but Sudan has more pyramids than any other country in the world. It has more pyramids. Now, they're not big pyramids, but they're many. They had lots and lots of pyramids. And they got that from Egypt. They also ended up adopting their writing system from the Egyptians as well. So they borrowed a subset of Egyptian hieroglyphs to write their own language called Meroitic. Now, the decipherment of Meroitic is hotly debated. It's hotly debated. There have been attempts to claim that Meroitic has been deciphered, but it is so debated that we can pretty much at this point say no one knows exactly for sure. Um, we do find some, say, crossover texts where they will sort of switch, where in Meroitic texts they'll switch between, say, Middle Egyptian or Late Egyptian and their dialect. But it's hard at that point to tell what's Egyptian, what's Meroitic at that point. But they had their own language. They had their own language. It was unique to them. We're still really not sure how to decipher it. So it still remains one of those. We don't have the equivalent of a Rosetta Stone to do a proper decipherment of Meroitic. But they used Egyptian hieroglyphics to write on stelae and inscriptions. So they had a very fertile culture. It lasted a long time. Fascinating culture. And there are people who just specialize in the Nubian culture. I'm not one of them. I'm not a specialist in Nubian culture. There was a specialist at the University of Toronto. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm asked this question from time to time, and I should remember his name because I went to the University of Toronto, but for some reason I just can never remember the guy's name. So it's really difficult. I never took any of his classes. His office was in the ROM's library. Oh yeah, we passed. Just sidebarring with my wife here, we passed his office several times when we went into the reading room at the ROM. But as I say, I just can never remember the guy's name. Yeah, you can look him up on the staff, the Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations Department at the University of Toronto. And he's published a few books, and that's where I would go for reading more about, say, Nubians and the Meroitic culture. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. It's a great super chat. Lots of cultural differences between the two. The two cultures did not get along. That's the other thing probably we should mention. Egyptians loved the Magi. And this was a tribe that lived in Kush. Absolutely adored Magi. They did not trust the Nubians, and the feeling was mutual. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Great question. Okay, maybe now we don't have to cut and paste. Let's see if we try this again. And awesome. Okay. Sinaitis Apologia for $100. Thank you very much for that really super generous super chat. Really appreciate it. Again, I've said many times, you really are supporting this channel in just ways that we are just so grateful for. Thank you so much. Very, very much appreciate your generosity towards us. We couldn't do this channel without your help. So we consider you a great partner in this ministry, and thank you so incredibly much. And he asks, what are your thoughts, assuming you've seen it, of Dr. Peterson's psychological significance of the Bible series? Okay. Jordan Peterson is a Jungian psychologist. Okay? He is looking at everything through a Jungian lens. So he's looking at myths and archetypes and the effects that those archetypes have on the psychology of human beings. So, you really have to keep in mind when you talk about a guy like Peterson, what his background is. Now, with that said, he does say some interesting stuff. Do I think his series on the Bible is good? No. I don't think his series on the Bible is good. I think he's trying, though. And I think he's trying it using a particular framework and a particular lens. Now, I think he's helped a lot of people. I think he has given a lot of people who don't have, say, mooring in, say, a traditional religious faith, a reason to get out of bed, clean their room, pick up their socks, take responsibility for their lives, find direction where they didn't have any. So I think he's been a tremendously positive influence. Okay? But I also don't think that his teachings on the Bible are terribly good. Now, let's take the opposite side of the coin. I also don't think that a lot of pastors do teachings on the Bible that are terribly good either. I think a lot of reasons that people are going to somebody like Jordan Peterson is because of a failure of the church to teach the Bible effectively, convincingly, interestingly. Okay, let's face it. You listen to some pastors and it's like watching paint dry. It's so boring. I mean, even I sometimes am sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, this is the most dreadfully boring sermon I have ever listened to. How can people put up with this? If you can say something that's relevant to the lives of people and use the Bible to do it, you've got 99% of the problem solved right there. That's why whenever I do a video, the first question I always try to answer is, why should you care? Why does this matter? Jordan Peterson makes no beef about why this stuff matters. Because if you don't listen to him, you're going to have a worse life. If you don't pick up make your bed in the morning or clean up your clothes off the floor, you're going to have a worse life than if you don't, than if you do. That's pretty good incentive to listen to some extent to what he says. Now, the rest of what he says are sort of psychological anecdotes. Again, out of a Jungian, mythical, archetypical perspective. I don't think that a lot of those have huge amounts of merit. I think he gets a lot of stuff wrong. I think he gets a lot of biblical stuff wrong. But I also know, too, that he's at least trying to grapple with it. He's trying to engage the text. And that goes a long ways. Somebody who's actually trying to engage something is better off than somebody who tries to, fudge his way through it without actually engaging the text. So it's one of those things that I think, say somebody with some spiritual maturity can watch, get some benefit out of. I wouldn't suggest a constant diet of Jordan Peterson. Okay? So again, it comes down to balance. Yeah, listen to what the guy says. He is a public intellectual. Just like I would say, many public intellectuals are worth listening to. Noam Chomsky is a public intellectual. He's worth listening to. You might not agree with him, but he's still worth listening to. Jordan Peterson is a public intellectual. He's smart. He's thought these things through. He's worth listening to. His opinions on the Bible leave a little bit to be desired. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's a great question, and I hope that engaged that. So thank you very much for that very, very generous super chat. Again, it really helps our channel grow, and basically you help us keep the lights on and the internet plugged in. Thank you so much. Okay, I think is that our last super chat? It might. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I just got a pop-up from Google saying this would be a great time for me to now insert some ads. YouTube has such nerve. I got this weird. I mean, normally when I get a pop up from YouTube, it's like, oh, your stream is lagging, or your signal's cutting out, or some emergency. And I get this pop up that says, you should put some ads here. Oh, those jokers. Okay, sorry about that. So Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Exodus 8:7 says Pharaoh's magicians were able to emulate the plague of frogs that God wrought. How do you think they did this? Ooh, well, it's hard to say how exactly they pulled this off. Egyptian priests, and essentially the magicians of Egypt, were forms of priests, particularly lector priests. They did have used both, say, incantations, ritual magic. They also did sleight of hand. Okay, they did both. So it's really hard to say what exactly was, say, conjuring from the spirits of the beyond to what is just them pulling a trick. Because they did both. They did both. Egyptians had a long tradition of ritual magic. The Book of the Dead is essentially a spell book. It is a spell book. The incantations they did for their temple rituals was read from a scroll, which was essentially, again, a spell book. They had love magic. They had magic to protect children. They had magic to curse your enemies. They had all sorts of various magic, and they come from a magical ritual worldview. So they believed in magic. They believed that they could appeal to the spirits to get them to help them affect certain outcomes. They also, though, did sleight of hand. And we do know this because we have, say, the remnants of certain statues that were meant to, let's say, occasionally fool the onlooker. Now, sometimes the onlooker wasn't fooled. At the same time, too, it wasn't beyond them. It wasn't beyond them to be able to do sleight of hand. So, I don't know how they pulled off the miracle of the frogs. I'm just going to take a brief look here at Exodus 8, just to make sure that it is talking about the frogs here. 8, verse 7. Yeah, verse 7. Let's pop that up here. And the magicians did the same. Start verse 6. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did the same with their secret arts, making frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Okay? Now, there's a possibility, too, that they did this through, say, applied pharmacology. Now, this is actually something that that was often done in say, we see this applied pharmacology in this respect sometimes done in, say, for example, in Caribbean cultures where voodoo is practiced. It is possible that the priests could have thrown something in the river that was an irritant that caused the frogs to come out. That's a possibility. We don't exactly know what or how they could have pulled it off. But, it's something that could have happened also. So, we don't exactly know how they did it. They didn't leave us a lot of magical texts with, say, the secrets of their divine arts. But there's more than one possibility here. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. The camel leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What kind of geological evidence should we expect to support a global flood? Okay, well, understand this, that I don't have a skin in this game. I mean, at this point, I haven't really come down on whether I support a global or a local flood yet, or even say a semi-global flood. There's essentially an idea too that's floating out there of a semi-global flood, where a flood basically floods in all the coastlines globally, but doesn't reach the high peaks. Okay, so there's more than one view on this, but we would expect there to be, for example, evidence of, say, for example, sea life on, say, mountain peaks. Right? Like maybe fossils on mountain peaks might be evidence for that. Rapid deposition of sediment. As the waters recede, we would expect there to be a lot of sediment accumulating quickly, perhaps through hydrological sorting. We would expect it to be at least concurrent in time. And this is where sort of things get really dicey, because, say, modern geological theory doesn't have a really... It uses fossils and Darwin's theory of evolution to date particular events in geological history. So an evolutionary presupposition is almost baked into paleographic stratigraphy. Oh, sorry, not paleographic. A Paleozoic stratigraphy. So stratigraphy before the dawn of writing, dawn of history, has that sort of evolutionary supposition baked into it. So this is really difficult to say. This is really, really difficult to say. This is one of the reasons why, for example, people who support cladistics say oftentimes reject the geological history that sort of comes out of say paleontology. Because paleontology really is dependent upon that interrelation between, say, Darwin's descent of species tied to particular types of stratigraphy. So it almost becomes a problem of circular definition. I don't have a good answer to this one, honestly. I don't have a good answer, which is why I tend to stay out of this. I can really sort of visualize where you can sort of support a global flood. But then again, too, I can also say, hey, maybe a semi-global or a regional flood is a possibility too. So, it's one of those things where, it depends on what side of the bed I get up on. So, but I usually tend to lean more towards a global flood, honestly. I just have not been thoroughly convinced. And there was a time when I was a science major. I was a science major, and just the whole sort of artifice of that evolutionary theory just never really convinced me. So, but anyway, that's the sort of evidence you would expect to find is like fossils up on the mountains. You'd expect to find sedimentation, big, aggregations of sedimentation happening quickly. The sort of the Achilles heel to that would be then if it's a sedimentation that happens over a long period of time. Then you're going to get into some problems. And then once you do identify that, it is then comes down to, well, how do you date that? And really, it's dating a global flood that's the real issue here. It's not so much that can you find evidence of a global flood, because almost every part of the world has been underwater at some period of time. Almost every part. This is why you find fossils up in the Jurassic Mountains. It's why you find ammonite shells in the Andes. I had these fossilized ammonites, beautiful black carbonized fossilized ammonites. Came from 5,000 feet above sea level in the Andes Mountain. There's very few places on this planet that have not been underwater at one point. And even the evolutionist admits that. The question is a matter of timing. So, did that happen all at once? Or did that happen sporadically? So, I'm going to leave that an open question. You're free to make up your own mind as you will. I encourage everyone to look at the data for themselves and make up their own minds. Which is why I'm not dogmatic about this. I just don't think there's any point in being dogmatic about this. However, again, you'll have to go and look through the evidence yourself. But I think if you want to make a case for it, you could. If you want to make a case against it, you could also do that too. So it depends on what evidence you. As my wife here points out, the bottom line is it's not a salvation issue. This is a tertiary issue at best. Not even a secondary issue. It's a tertiary issue. So, again, this comes down to what is the conscience of the believer. And what evidence do you accept, and what presuppositions are you going to accept? So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm going to take this one. Take this non-super chat, because... Alright, Australopithecus afarensis, Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Come on, dude. Dismissing evolutionary theory destroys your credibility. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I don't have a skin in that game. If you were a biologist and studied it, that's one thing, but to dismiss evolution as an Egyptologist, well, you know what? Here's the thing. I did half my undergrad in biology. Okay, so I got a lot of science. I got a lot of this. I have studied this quite in depth. Okay, a lot of people do discount evolution, and frankly, it's not just biblical scholars who do this. There was a book done many years ago called The Not Evolutionists, I think it was called. One of the things that they did was looked at, say, people who were not creationists, but had other gripes against evolution. For example, a very large number of the LGBTQ community rejects evolution, because a major factor of evolution is the passing down of your genes through reproduction, survival of the fittest through reproduction. The LGBT community doesn't reproduce and doesn't have skin. Basically, they are non-persons in the evolutionary scheme of things. So many in that community have rejected it. So it's not just creationists. And frankly, I don't accept evolutionary theory, but I don't accept any other theory either. Frankly, evolutionary theory has gone through 4 major changes since Darwin. 4. You have Darwinian evolution, okay, where animals are, they're struggling against, tooth and claw, and they're gaining traits in their lifetime. Well, Neo-Darwinianism basically says, hey, traits aren't inherited. They're part of your genetic makeup. You just express what you have. You don't pick up traits in your lifetime. So, first era Darwinianism hits the trash can, and now you've got the era of Julian Huxley and his neo-Darwinian theory. All right. Well, we start getting more and more of the fossil record go in, and we see, hey, the slow millions of adaptations over time also isn't seen in the fossil record. So now you get the punctuated equilibrium theory of Gould and Eldridge. Well, you know what? Even that's sort of, kind of hinky, because all they've done is they haven't explained the phenomena of punctuated equilibrium. They've just labeled it. So that's your third generation of evolutionary theory. Now, today, we've got a fourth generation of evolutionary theory called epigenetic evolution. Okay? Well, we're sort of, in some ways, back to original Darwinism, where genes are adapting to meet the traits, but are not necessarily passed on. So, there's a lot that goes on in evolutionary theory that's not necessarily stable. And frankly, I've decided to sit this one out. Okay? I'm not going to I'm not going to dismiss evolutionary theory necessarily, but I'm not going to endorse it either. I don't have to say anything. There's nothing that compels me as a scholar to endorse or deny it. And that's why I'm saying, hey, you want to believe it? Fine. You don't want to believe it? Fine. Now, I did study it. I had a bibliography of 200 sources when I did sort of go through the whole evidence for evolution. Okay? So I'm not dismissing this out of hand. It's something I have studied and studied deeply. But at the same time, too, I'm not comfortable endorsing it. Okay? So, that's my credibility does not rest on this. Not in any way, shape, or form. So, thank you very much for that retort, but that's where I think we're at. Okay, so saw some more super chats here. I saw that. Yes, a super chat that's particularly nasty will not necessarily get a response, because one of the things, and some of you will have seen it, YouTube says that just because you put in a super chat does not guarantee a response if it's nasty. So we do eliminate nasty super chats. So where were we? I find where I left off here. Okay, I think our last super chat here was at the Camel Leopard. So, the Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I've seen many people of the faith try to discredit Paul, eventually falling into apostasy. Why do you think this is? What makes people distrust Paul, and is it reversible? I have seen this particularly amongst, say, sort of the Hebrew roots people. Okay? I've also seen this among certain Marcionites. People don't like Paul generally for a couple reasons. One reason people typically dislike Paul is because he really emphasizes the grace aspect of the faith. Okay? So, those who want to be, say, legalists, like the Hebrew roots movements, who want to go back to obeying the ceremonial law of the Sinai covenant, really aren't going to like Paul. They aren't really going to like Paul at all. Okay? And those who basically also want to, say, just do say the Gospels, but not pay attention to the Old Testament, are also not going to like Paul. Because he's basically going to tell them, hey, you know what? Stop sinning. He's also going to tell people, you know, if you are living in the law of love, law of grace, you're going to give up the old life as well. And that's going to be consistent with applied Torah. So you're going to get people on both sides of that equation. You're going to get the Marcionites who basically, you know, discard the Old Testament and basically said, you know, we don't need, never did need the law. And you're also going to get the Hebrew roots guys who say, well, we don't need the grace because we got the law. So, you know, and Paul is sort of straddling between, say, both extremes. You know, Paul is basically saying, hey, you know, to be in the community of believers is to obey the law through grace. And it's not that your works are saving you. In fact, far from it. It's grace that saves you, but it is unto good works, unto keeping the law. So I do think that there's, you know, we find both currents these days. You know, there are people who just really hate Paul for either reason. So essentially, that's why they're distrusting Paul, is because he's nuanced. He's nuanced. He's basically telling you, yes, absolutely, you got to live by grace. Yes, but that grace is unto good works that God has prepared in advance for you, per Ephesians chapter 2. So, you know, that's, people aren't going to trust that. People aren't going to trust a thing that isn't black or white. This is gray. But that's maturity. That's Christian maturity. People want to live in an infantile state, whether they're antinomians or legalists. Both hate Paul. Both antinomians and legalists reject the message of Paul. They just do so for different reasons. Is it reversible? Well, the problem is that both legalists are trusting on their righteousness to save them, and antinomians are trusting on a false sense of what grace means. So, unless they get the gospel and abide by the true gospel, I don't know if you can reverse that. Because it's a distortion of the gospel to begin with. And if you've got a distortion of the gospel, you've got a distortion of the salvation message. And if you're distorting the salvation message, really, really difficult to turn that around. That's not something you can just immediately turn around. They have got to come back to Christ. You know, and basically all Paul is doing is just, you know, emphasizing and amplifying upon what Jesus said. So if they're not going to trust the words of the master, you know, they're not going to trust the words of his servant either. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It's a good question, but it's not something that's easy to turn around because the root causes of this are much, much deeper than just a surface distrust of Paul. It's a distrust of the message itself. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right. And next one is from Eleko for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shalom, Folkers, and everyone. Well, shalom to you too. Shabbat shalom. We do recognize that this is the Jewish Sabbath, and we do wish all our Jewish viewers, whether they're Messianic Jewish or a form of rabbinical Judaism, a Shabbat shalom. We do recognize that this comes on your guys' Sabbath, and unfortunately there's very little we can do to make this not on your Sabbath. But 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 if you find this enjoyable and relaxing, it is a form of Sabbath. So we do appreciate that we have a lot of Jewish viewers and Sabbatarians who view this channel. So we do appreciate them. We're grateful that they often leave their questions beforehand. Very much appreciate them. And we thank you so much for the super chat. And we wish you a very, very restful Sabbath. Thank you so very much. Okay. Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Is there any ancient extra-biblical literature from non-Israelite cultures that discusses and or venerates the Israelite God? The problem here is defining the Israelite God. Now, the Israelite God, Yahweh, the answer to that is no. We don't have any other extra-biblical texts that discuss that. Now, if it's El Elyon, or El, as in the great God El, the father God El, then the answer is yes. We do find, for example, El Elyon in a few, I think it's 7th century Aramaic stele. I think there's 2 treaty stele from Aram that talk about El Elyon. There's also, we also find El discussed in, say, Ugaritic texts. We also find it in the names of several inscriptions across the ancient Near East. We do find it, for example, in the Amarna texts. It doesn't talk about El specifically there, but it's incorporated in names. So, when you find it incorporated in names, it usually means that somebody is worshiping it and somebody is venerating it somewhere. Mythological texts, we are really sort of limited to the text at Ugarit, which date to roughly the 13th century BC. At Ugarit, we do find the father god, El, but also a lot of minor gods too, like Mut and Baal, etc. It's not exactly the same as the Israelite God. The pantheon at Ugarit was a henotheist, which is you had one big father god, and you owed your loyalty to him or perhaps Baal. But there was other gods running around too. So it all comes down to identity. What is the identity of the Israelite God? What are his attributes? Are his attributes shared with other gods? And that we're not quite sure of. We don't have enough texts. We do find, for example, Yahweh mentioned in, for example, the Ostraca at was it Tel Ajrud? But that one also mentions an Asherah, his Asherah as well. So is that a non-Israelite inscription? Is that an Israelite inscription? You know, there's debate about over that. So we do find some extra biblical literature mentioning the gods that, or the god that Israel also worshipped. But is that Israel incorporating the names of other gods and identities of other deities, or is that Israel's gods being sort of exported out? We're not quite sure. We don't have enough literature here to determine precisely. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. We could always use more texts. More texts make things clearer. They can also add more confusion too. They can add a lot more confusion. But we do find that more texts are usually more helpful, and we definitely need more texts from Israel itself to give us a better sense. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Tony G for 4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Who or what is the restrainer or katekon in Greek in 2 Thessalonians 2, 6-7? Okay. Let's take a look at that. I think I know what you're talking about here, so. Pull the passage. Okay. Start at verse 5. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you that these things? And you know what restrains him now, so that in his time he may be revealed. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken away. And then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. Okay. Now, what we're dealing here with is an eschatological passage. Now, the mystery of lawlessness, the lawless one, there's really no controversy about that. That's typically connoted with the Antichrist. Now, what restrains him? The restrainer here. To hold fast, to hold life. It's actually mentioned again in verse 7. He who now restrains him. Just a quick peek at the Greek. There it is. So, okay, so it is a participle, present active, masculine singular. Okay. Okay, so masculine singular participle. The English. Now, in typical theological circles, this will generally be seen as, say, the Holy Spirit. That's how it's typically interpreted, as the one who restrains the mystery of lawlessness is the Holy Spirit. So that's typically how this is interpreted in theological circles. But it isn't exactly clear. It could be God the Father. The text doesn't actually say who is doing the restraining, but it is someone with enough power to restrain the mystery of lawlessness here and the lawless one. So, and verse 9, says that basically the lawless one, the one who's coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all the powers and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish because they did not receive the love of truth so as to be saved. Okay. So, again, that lawless one is typically seen as being the Antichrist, the one who comes to deceive the world, to perform lying signs and wonders, to deceive the nations, to bring them to war. So that's typically juxtaposed. That lawless one is juxtaposed against the person who restrains. And the idea is that if what we have here, again, verse 3 here, let no one deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. So, again, we're dealing with the lawless one being the Antichrist, but the restrainer is the one who's, again, opposing the Antichrist, keeping him back, keeping Satan back until the fullness of the Gentiles is complete. Verse 3 again says that it has to be until, this will be in effect until the apostasy comes, the falling away. And that's typically viewed as the falling away of the church. Believers of the church fall away from the church, because they weren't really believers, or but the church's influence is diminished. It's no longer as effectual as it once was. So the equal and opposite here, and they're not really equal and opposite, but the one who can restrain and hold back Satan in essentially perpetuity until the fullness of the Gentiles is complete is usually regarded as the Holy Spirit, because he is God's presence in the world, and he is the presence that is basically affects the kingdom of Christ and the kingdom of God. So while it's not explicit in this text, it is most often interpreted as being the Holy Spirit. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. And if there's any doubt here, besides Acts chapter 5, I know there's some sects out there that view the Holy Spirit as a force, and it's not a force, it's a person. It's the third person of the Trinity, it's God. And it's the person of God who Christ sent as the comforter to bring all Christians into truth, into righteousness, to act as Christ's agent among his people. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. Very much appreciate the super chat. Okay, that looks like the end of the super chat. So we're going to go into some non-super chats. Oh boy, oh boy. Someone, the person asked, what sparked your interest in Egyptology? Well, there were two things that sparked my interest in Egyptology. The first thing was Saturday morning television specials on King Tut's tomb. When I was growing up and I was a kid, they would show these specials on Saturday mornings, and they would have feature the boy King Tut and the mystery of his tomb, or the curse of King Tut's tomb, and I just found that all really super interesting. The other thing that sparked my interest in Egyptology was actually an episode of Doctor Who called The Pyramids of Mars. And if you're familiar with Doctor Who, the old classic Doctor Who, with Tom Baker, there's this one episode that he goes up against the god Seth. And, there's pyramids on Mars, and he goes into a tomb, and he's in this old Victorian manor with coffins, and I just looked at the artwork there, and it just went, oh, I loved all that. Absolutely loved all that. I knew at that point that's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. So I found that stuff just so fascinating. It was just, so addictive, so addictive. So as a kid, I would go to the library and pick up books on hieroglyphs. I really couldn't read them until I actually took Middle Egyptian in college, but that didn't prevent me from loving them anyway. So anyway, that's what sparked my interest in Egyptology. It was cultivated as a child. So it was just one of those things that I was just so fascinated with as a, and I remember there was this module we had in history when I was in grade 7. We did this module on history. And one of the options you could do as a project was build a pyramid. Well, the other kids who built pyramids for their project on ancient Egypt, did the straight pyramids. I did the step pyramid at Saqqara. Okay? I did all the steps, perfectly to scale, and it was just like I overachieved that one. So yeah, for me it was like candy. It was absolutely like candy. I could not get enough of Egypt as a kid. So having the opportunity to do so later on in life, I just jumped at it. Just absolutely jumped. So anyway, thank you for that question. Interesting question. Okay, we got another super chat here. Where'd it go? It looks like it disappeared on me. I'm gonna have to stop and restart this again. I had to do this a couple times now. All right, John Febeck for 19.99. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm gonna watch this live stream later, but wanted to pop in and wish you a happy Canada Day. Well, thank you very much. I very, very much appreciate that. Again, as I said, Canadians are not really big Canada Day celebrators. You won't hear a lot of fireworks, although we did have fireworks yesterday. But yeah, we do celebrate it, and it's usually a statutory holiday here, and usually a day off, and we do love it. So we do very much appreciate the sentiment and the well wishes, and very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you so much. We got one from RG Strategy for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, why do statues of kings of most Old Kingdom have no uraeus on the headdress? For example, the statue of Khafre enthroned. Okay. That's a good question, and we don't exactly know why. Now, some of that might just be the way. Let me just take a brief look at something here, cause I want to take a look at that closely, cause I am going to take a look at some of my photos here. Just a quick reference. Just so. Yeah. And Egyptian Museum. One of the interesting things about the Egyptian Museum is it used to be, I don't know about the gem, but the old Egyptian Museum was organized by period. So you could just, flip through. That one doesn't have one either way because it's not close enough. So I can take a quick look through the Egyptian Museum and their statuary. So here we got a statue of Djoser. Face is kind of mutilated, so we don't know if he had a uraeus or not. Senefru. All right, Senefru, the statue of Senefru, definitely had a uraeus. Okay. Doesn't have the vulture, but it definitely has a uraeus. So we got one there of at least one Old Kingdom from Dynasty 4 that has the uraeus. We have, say, Khafre that doesn't. User Koff, his statue, his bust does not seem to have a uraeus. So it does seem that some of them do. So the question then is, why do some of them do and some of them don't? And that's actually a pretty good question. So it's not all. Yeah, Menkare's statue doesn't. I think some of it will depend upon, say, the headdress. For example, if they're wearing the headdress of Lower Egypt, it does seem that when they wear the headdress of Lower Egypt, sort of that big, sort of the white crown, the cone-shaped one, they tend to more often wear it with the Uraeus than, but not always, but they do more often wear it with the Uraeus than not. And I don't know the reason exactly why they do that. If it's just because it's a particular symbolism of that region. But we do see, for example, where there are some Old Kingdom statues that do have the Uraeus. So, now, on the Nemes crown, which is sort of that cloth that drapes back, the Old Kingdom statuary does not seem to include it with the Uraeus. Again, we don't know why. But they do have it. So it was extant. Don't know the extent of why it's in some statuary. That might just be stylistic. We do know that certain statuary goes under certain stylistic conventions that don't necessarily reflect what actually was being worn. Like, for example, one of the things is you can actually tell, like, a Middle Kingdom statuary, because they have this weird, massive knot on their belts. I mean, it looks weird. It looks really weird. It looks like they got a cancerous growth coming out of their stomach. You know, it's a very weird looking thing. But you can always, if you see that, you know you're looking at a Middle Kingdom statue, because for some reason that knot was exceptionally emphasized during the Middle Kingdom. In the Old Kingdom, for example, you know, statuary is held with very straight, almost rigid arms. So we don't know how much of this is stylistic. We also don't know how much of this too is, say, preservation in the archaeological record. For example, the statue we have got a very large statue of Zoser from Dynasty 3. Now, his face has been mutilated, and there's actually a chip right in the forehead where there would have been an Uraeus. And we do know that Zoser used Uraeus everywhere on his pyramids. You know, it's all over the place. You know, he was a big, big fan of the Uraeus. So, you know, did he wear it as an amulet on a forehead? It's conceivable. It's really possible that he did. Because, you know, you go down to his temple at Saqqara and you see on, say, the retaining wall, these massive Uraeus friezes just surrounding the site. They're spectacular, by the way, absolutely. If you ever get a chance to go to Egypt and go to Saqqara, gotta hit the step pyramid. It's just, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. That's my favorite pyramid, bar none. Beautiful, interesting site. Very beautiful, interesting. So, some do, some don't. So that's sort of the answer to the question here is, you know, when you take a survey of these, you can't just take the best examples. You have to sort of take some of the outliers too. The say the less famous statues. So, you know, Senefru, definitely, you know, and he's definitely Old Kingdom. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I hope that answered your question. Okay. Oops. Cam Britt for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is the Prince of Persia in Daniel 10:13? How is he stronger than Gabriel? Thanks. Okay, let's go to Daniel 10. We'll back up a few verses. Or just one verse here, and we'll bring up the Bible. Okay, and we'll start verse 12. Then he said to me, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, for this is the first day that you set your heart on understanding this, and on humbling yourself before God, your words were heard. And I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the princes of Egypt, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia." Okay. Now, understand what's going on here. Okay, we have a battle of spirits. We have a battle of spirits that's going on here. You have Gabriel, and he's trying to get to Daniel. At least I think it's Gabriel. I'm pretty sure it is. Is it Gabriel? Yeah, we'll assume it's Gabriel. Anyway, I think it's Gabriel. So anyway, he's up against the prince. The wording just right. Prince of the kingdom of Persia, withstanding him for 21 days, and then he gets help. Now, how stronger is he than Gabriel? He's not necessarily stronger, but you read, for example, here. Let's see, where do I see it now? In verse 13, where he said, "Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia." Kings of Persia, plural. So it wasn't just the prince of the kingdom of Persia, it was the prince of the kingdom of Persia plus the kings of Persia. I had said this a few weeks ago in a live stream. The forces of darkness hunt in packs. They hunt in packs. They rarely go into combat alone. Whether it's against a human being, whether it's against another angel or spiritual power or heavenly power, they never go at it alone. So what you have here is not one demon against Gabriel. It's a pack of demons or spiritual powers of spiritual darkness. Principalities. Essentially, these are principalities. They might not be demons per se, but they are principalities. Essentially, powers of darkness that hold a regional area. So these are regional powers. And they're hunting in a pack. They're ganging up. So, Prince of the Kingdom of Persia, plus the Kings of Persia, against Gabriel. Needs a call from the cavalry. So the cavalry is called in. So Michael and probably some of his buddies are coming in to lend an assist. Okay? So it's not just a matter of this being a one-on-one contest, because this isn't a one-on-one contest. This is a one versus many contest. And Gabriel needs help. So he calls in the posse to help him against not just the prince of the kingdom of Persia, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia, plus the kings of Persia. So, again, the takeaway from this is these guys hunt in packs, and this is no exception to that general rule that the powers of darkness hunt in packs. So that's what's going on here. Okay? So it's not that he's exceptionally stronger, but he's got more. He's got numbers on his side. And Michael needs to come in with the posse to even the playing field. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And next is Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could you take my non-super chat at 9:45? He is concerned there's a theological dilemma if God would allow a biblical author to promote something wrong. Okay, let me see if I can find it here. Okay. The question is, someone I know is concerned that if your view on Nephilim Genesis 6 is right, Peter and Jude still believed in angels. They draw theological problems with inerrancy because how can he inspire a lie? Okay. Now, when we talk about, say, Peter and Jude, just see if there's... Okay, now, there's a couple things remarks we have to make here. Nephilim and, say, for example, the sons of God. Peter and Jude don't explicitly reference the sons of God or the Nephilim. They do reference the fall angels. Okay? The tie between those two, the whole idea of, say, Second Temple Judaism, tying the fall of angels with the sons of God and the Nephilim, that's a connection of the Second Temple Judaism that's not necessarily part of the biblical text. So there's really not a problem here of inerrancy. One of the things we do, like even Michael Heiser will say, the fall of angels is one of the rebellions, but it isn't the only one. Heiser does make a distinction between the fall of the sons of God and the Nephilim with the fall of angels. For Heiser, those are two different falls. Two different rebellions. Now, while I do not necessarily hold Heiser's view on the sons of God and Nephilim, and perhaps they were part of that Second Temple period Judaism was an inspiration for Peter and Jude. Peter and Jude also don't explicitly make that tie. So if neither Peter nor Jude are explicitly making that tie, that connection between the fall of angel and the Nephilim in Genesis 6, then there's no lie here that's being inspired. But even if we, for example, gave the, say, the benefit of the doubt here that there was a connection, that doesn't preclude that there's something spiritual happening underneath the Nephilim of Genesis 6 that is similar to that. Now, what I'm giving you here with my interpretation of the Nephilim in Genesis 6 is the late Bronze Age point of view. Okay? That would be what's called a primary reading. Okay? Now, in Judaism, you have three readings. You have a primary reading. You have the reading you're supposed to search out, the underlying, the deeper meaning. And then you've got what they call an allegorical meaning. Okay? So in Judaism, you can have three readings of a text at the same time. There's nothing preventing my reading from being the primary reading, while Heiser's reading is, say, that underlying reading. That's then later explicitly also talked about in the book of Job. So that wouldn't be a lie. That would just be how the ancient Israelites read their texts. So again, we can't approach this, say, naively. We do have to approach these texts with the sensitivity of understanding them in their particular context. And if we understand both, say, Genesis 6 and Peter and Jude in their historical and cultural contexts, it's very, very easy to see that there's no inconsistency, and therefore this doesn't provide a problem for inerrancy in any way. So anyway, I hope that made sense. I hope you understood that, and I hope that addressed the issue. And thank you, RG, for sponsoring that question. I very much appreciate that. Okay. That was a question, right? Okay. That was Mr. Rich B.O.B. that asked for that question. So yeah. So yes, thank you very much, Mr. Rich B.O.B. for that your non-super chat and directing us back to that. So we very much appreciate the super chat, and we're glad we could have addressed that question. Okay, Sean Horton for $20. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Brueggemann, comment from Brueggemann. Hebrew is endlessly imprecise and unclear. It lacks the connecting words it denotes rather than connotes. It points and opens and suggests, but it does not conclude or define. Would you translate that? Oh, yes. Wow. Okay. How do I put this? Hebrew has a incredible lexical range. Incredible lexical range. And I'm actually going to give you an example that I did a video on the, that's going to be coming up in a few weeks on did Pharaoh perish in the Sea of Reeds? Okay. But I am going to take you just to one particular passage here. I'm just going to... Okay. Now, and I'll take you to Exodus 14:9. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all their horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army. That word army, that is incredibly vague. Amazingly vague. It can mean strength. It can mean efficiency. It can mean what else can it mean? It can mean wealth. It can mean, and it can mean an army. Okay? The fact is, when we start looking at a passage like this, where context, can point to more than one meaning here. Like, for example, it makes just as much sense in this particular passage that the Egyptians chased after him and all his horses and the chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his strength. That can make just as much sense in the passage, because Hebrew is so incredibly precise. Like, for example, the word hul can mean circle, sphere, hubcap, a bottle top. It's just anything circular and round can be a hul. It's just one of those things about Hebrew. It's just incredibly vague language. It has a part of it just comes out of the development of Hebrew itself. Hebrew does not have a lot of core lexemes. It's not like Greek. Greek's got like 10 million words. Just a mind-boggling number of vocabulary. Hebrew has about 2,000 core lexemes. And it gets its sort of semantic range by extending the range of those lexemes. and a lexeme is like a core word. So, so you get here when you do Hebrew, it's just you have to look at, say, other possibilities. So, Brueggemann here is right. You can't take something in, say, an English translation and go, well, that is the definitive meaning of the Hebrew. That just doesn't work. It doesn't work in Hebrew. Now, you might get away with that in Greek because of the precision of the language. Greek can be an incredibly precise language, even though it does have its interpretive nuances. But Hebrew, very, very vague language. It's very vague. So, this is why you have to be really careful when you exegete Hebrew. Because you can't just come down on, say, yeah, this is the definitive meaning of the word as found in the King James Bible. The King James Bible is a great commentary on the Hebrew. Oh, yes, I've heard that one. we interpret the Hebrew by the King James. So, Brueggemann here is really right. He is correct. It's imprecise, it's unclear. Even the prepositions have a lot of, say, wiggle room in them. So even the relationships between words can be difficult at times if you're trying to get a precise meaning out of them. So, yeah, the idea of denoting versus connoting, again, it denotes, basically states what happened, but not necessarily gives you a clear indication of what actually, with precision, took place. So, it would be it's a terrible language for scientific work. It's, for religious literature, it served the purpose well. But it does have its vagaries, its lack of clarity, and its imprecision that we as exegetes must, engage. So, anyway, thank you for that super chat. It's a great question. It's a really great question. And I very much appreciate the super chat. So, thank you very much. Okay, so that's the end of the super chats again. We are back to it. So, oh, interesting. I'm going to put up this comment by Mr. Rich B.O.B. Ancient Egypt had the Bible. Oh, that about army is interesting. Reminds me that in Beowulf, I think it gets the verb probably. V1b, well, verse 1b, it uses the word, and I do not know my old English here, so, darim, and it's a bit vague. It can mean army, power, strength, reputation. Yeah, a lot of old languages are like this. This is not something that's restricted to Hebrew, but we do find it in a lot of old languages. And that doesn't surprise me that we find it in Old English as well. English has supplemented its vocabulary over the centuries by importing other languages into, add vocabulary to give it more precision. So you got the old Anglo-Saxon words, but you then have some German thrown in, and then some French. So that Latinesque language introduction, helped give English a bit more precision. So yeah, we do find this in other languages too, but that's a great example. That's a wonderful example. Okay, let's go back to some non-super chats here and see what we find. Oh, Camel Leopard. Okay. If given complete creative control to make a movie about the Exodus, why would you wish that on me? What did I do to you? What would be some of the things, some of their most controversial decisions be? Omitting the series in the 13th century BC dating. Okay. Wow. I did do a consult on an archaeological concept on a film once. And one thing I learned about the movie industry is they don't listen to their consultants. They don't listen to them at all. There was a wagon wheel, you know, and it looked like something that, he got the idea from the Flintstones. It was like a bunch of boards nailed together that was cut in a circle. People in ancient times didn't make wheels that way. The wheel in ancient times came out of bow making technology. Basically, the tread was stretched around the spokes. That's how ancient wheels were made. So when I saw this thing that looked like it came out of the Flintstones, I just flipped out. It was just ancient wheels weren't made like that, right? Well, they just decided it was too much work and too much money to change it. So they just sort of ignored it. So, yeah. There's a lot of controversial decisions I would make. First of all, I would have them do a recreation of P. Ramses and Avaris. There'd be no pyramids in the background. They wouldn't probably care for that all that much. They probably also wouldn't like terribly that a lot of the plagues would look like normal flooding events. I would actually have them show the inundation. Show that at the beginning where the river turns to blood. That usually happens when it occurs in other times in Egyptian history. That occurs at the beginning of the inundation cycle in September. Well, the Israelites, the final plague takes place in around April or May, at the end of the inundation cycle. So I would actually show the full inundation cycle and what happens as a result of that. So that's a long period of time to show. I would have them dressed right. I would have them in period clothing, not dressed up like a cross-dresser like Exodus Gods and Kings portrayed Pharaoh. So yeah, I'd be making a lot of artistic and stylistic changes to what we typically see in Exodus films. But I would have to be given complete creative control because, frankly, they wouldn't listen. Most of the time, they don't listen to their consultants. And if the one thing you learn about Hollywood, actually having worked in Hollywood, is that all the power rests with the producers. So producers have complete creative control. Nobody else does. Not even the underwriters, the guys who are funding the films, they have very little control. They've got 10% of the power. 90% of the power in a Hollywood production rests with the producers. Actors are just slaves. Most of the people working on a film are slaves. Actors have very little creative control. All the creative control rests with the producers. And they don't like people knowing that. Producers want to sort of sit back and just create films. And treat them their way. But you go into some studios, and when you start seeing separate bathrooms for the producers and a separate bathroom for everyone else, you get the idea where the power structure is very, very quickly. There's a kitchen for the producers, and there's the kitchen for everyone else. And they're not the same. They don't have the same food. Kitchen for the producers might have, cold cuts, nice cheeses, all that. Kitchen for everyone else might have breakfast cereals without milk. So, you do get a really interesting look at how Hollywood really works when you've actually worked with a studio. So yeah, it's just really it was an eye opener when I did this when I worked for a Hollywood studio. Very much an eye opener. It was not what I expected, and the power structures were not what I expected either. But in order to have that creative control, you'd really have to be a producer. So, I think that the probably the most controversial decision would be getting that creative control. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. It's an interesting question. But I don't think I'll ever be able to have full creative control over a movie on the Exodus. I don't think anyone would give me that. But anyway, thank you for the question. Okay. Let's see what other non-super chats have. Oh, we have one super chat here from Jamie Russell for $5. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Good to see you here tonight. Why did Spurgeon, Edwards, Gill, Wesley, etc. think Michael was Jesus, the second person of the Godhead? Please expound. God bless. Now, that's going back a ways too. I have to really think that one through, because I do remember there was a reason why. And I think it was because of the epithet it's used actually in Daniel. Let's check this here. Daniel 9 or Daniel 12. Do a quick look up here. Yeah, okay. The reason is because what they're doing is taking an interpretation of Daniel 12:1. Okay? And Daniel 12:1 says, "Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone found in the book of life, will be rescued." Okay, so guys like Spurgeon, Edwards, Gill, Wesley, etc., they're basically looking at Daniel 12:1, and they're basically saying that Michael here is a placeholder for Jesus Christ. The great prince who stands over the sons of your people will arise. Okay. That is one particular interpretation of this passage, but it's by no means the only interpretation for this passage. Okay. Now, there are other exegetes that basically say that that because of the messianic, let's just say the veil that's over the messianic revelation. One of the things about the second person of the Godhead, the whole Son of God, Messiah, is it's alluded to in the Old Testament, but it's also concealed too, which is why we often interpret the Old Testament according to the New Testament, is because the New Testament reveals much more about the Old Testament. Now, there's also here, again, going back to, say, Hebrew exegesis. The way Israelites did exegesis. There's, again, that primary meaning. There's also the meaning you search for, and then there's the allegorical meaning. I'm never a big fan of the allegorical meaning. So I always almost always discard the allegorical meaning, unless it's clear that that's what's being said here. I think there's a respect here that, it's referring to both. That what's being referred to here as the primary meaning is Michael, the archangel, not Jesus Christ, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. But what we have here is also typology. Typology, where Michael here is a type of Christ. And we see typology all through the Old Testament. And typology is used frequently in the New Testament. So while the New Testament doesn't explicitly say that Daniel 12:1 is Jesus Christ, you can look back at Daniel 12:1 and say it is a type of Christ. It is a type of Messiah. So I think what's happening here with Spurgeon, Edwards, Gill, and Wesley is they are confusing the primary meaning with the searched for meaning. They're confusing the two and conflating the two meanings to just get at the Christological meaning. So that's why they're doing this. Then that's why they're having this particular interpretation. So not everything that comes out of our reformers is gold, but I also don't ignore what they say either. So they are correct that there's a search for meaning under that's definitely typological, that alludes to the Messiah. That's a type of Christ, but there's also a primary meaning here that is referring to the archangel as well. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and you have a great night. Okay. Okay, so we're going to take a few more super chats. We're at 2.5 hours now, so we're getting... we've had a pretty good run here for the night, so... Let's see here. Let's take a few more non-super chats, and then we will call it a day. I'll answer this one, because I don't know. Patrick Grandchamp. Hi, Dr. Falk. Have your studies ever led you to study the Hypsisterians, and if so, what do you know about them? I know absolutely nothing about them. My studies have never led me there. I have no idea what they are. Oh. Okay. No, I've never studied them, never run across them, know nothing about them. So, complete blank. Sorry. But it's a question, and obviously one that I should probably look into. Well, thank you very much for the question. Dirty Varmint asks, if you had a math textbook and found one page was a lie, would you throw away the whole textbook and give it up on math? No, of course not. I mean, look. You look up if you look up an answer key of look up the answer key in most math textbooks, you'll find that one or two answers are wrong. Does that mean you throw out the math textbook? No. We also have to understand that if you're making, say, the analogy here of do you find a mistake in the Bible, do you throw it out? Well, there's a lot of things that can be mistakes. Transcription errors. Look, I'll say this. Do I have my book here? Okay. All right. I'm going to show you a mistake in my book. There is a mistake in my book. My published book. All right. Now, very, very first paragraph. I don't see if it's focused. Okay, it says, it is a message written in a visual language that everyone knew 3,330 years ago, but is lost to us today. Okay. I did not write 3,330. Okay. None of my edits had that. That was a change made by the typesetter by mistake. Okay? That was not a mistake made by the author. That was a mistake made by the typesetter. And it happened in the very first paragraph of my book. After the final galleys were sent. Okay? So So, not every mistake is caused by the original author. So, like, for example, we find that a lot of, say, errors that we find in, say, the biblical texts are copyist errors. They're changes made by copyists. Sometimes they're attempts to update vocabulary. Sometimes they're errors like homoarcton or homoteluton, where the I just jumps and they skip a piece of the text. Fortunately, we do have enough manuscripts out there that we can sort of zero in on what the original reading was in most cases. But no, I mean, if I found one mistake, would I throw it out? Well, for a text that has survived as long as it has through the process of copying, it's remarkably well intact, remarkably well preserved. There's no text like it that's as well preserved for what it's had to do to survive. So we do have to keep that in mind. So even like, for example, your example here of if I had a math textbook and found one mistake, I wouldn't throw out the whole textbook. I'd understand maybe that mistake was introduced some other way. The whole idea of inerrancy is not on the copies. It doesn't rest with the copies. It rests with the autographa, the autographs. And we find often that mistakes are entered because we don't have the autographs. It's the copyist that ends up making the mistakes, not the original author itself. So, it's a good question. It's an interesting analogy. But it's also, we also have to be a little more nuanced with how we view inerrancy and inspiration as well. So anyway, thank you for the question. It's a good question. It's an interesting question, but that. Ooh, now someone's just trying to bait me. RG strategy, if I can catch it. Would you throw a book or throw a roll or down book on Egyptian chronology? I have spent way too much money on Roll's books. Oh my gosh, I'll never get that money back. But you have to with him if you want to engage him in any way. Roll keeps changing his views with every new book. There's no stability in his views. So if you want to keep up with him, you got to keep buying his new book, because it's annoying as all get out because he keeps changing his new chronology. It's just ridiculous, and it doesn't work any better. In fact, his newest revisions are worse than his old ones. As far as Down, I mean, oh my gosh, his David Down's book is just ridiculously bad, just ridiculously bad. But you go to meetings of, say, Young Earth creationists, and they're pitching it. David Down is like their favorite guy. It's just ridiculously bad stuff. Yeah, would I put some money down to probably buy David Down's books? I might. If I find a used copy that is really, really cheap, because I don't think it's worth much. But yeah, I'll never recoup my investment on David Roll's books back. I just and they're so bad and convoluted. I mean, they're rubbish. They're absolute rubbish. There, I would throw out the book if I could. So. Depends on the book. All right, let's take a few more non-super chats and then call it a night. Warrior of the Most High. Are there any good resources on Luvian language and culture, etc.? Yes. There is a very, very good book on the Luvian language, and I think it's by a person called Payne. Payne, and I'll take a quick look at it. I do own this book myself. I just don't have it in arm's reach. Yes, Anik Payne. The title of the book is Hieroglyphic Luvian: An Introduction with Original Texts. Her name is Annick, and last name Payne. It's available on Amazon. It's a very good book on hieroglyphic Luvian. In fact, it's the definitive text on hieroglyphic Luvian. So I recommend, if you want to learn hieroglyphic Luvian, that's the book to get. So that's the resource I would recommend for the Luvian language. Okay. All right, I'll take this Slim 2K question. Hello, Dr. and Mrs. Falk. If the pyramids were tombs, why did they have the Valley of the Kings? Is there evidence that the pyramids could have had another use, maybe energy sources, as some say? Okay. There's no evidence that they had any other use. They were the tombs of kings. They were the center of royal necropoli. So basically, you would have a pyramid, and then the tombs of princes, queens, nobles, administrators, viziers would be then buried in around the pyramid. So your pyramid was sort of the center hub of a royal necropolis. Okay? So, if the pyramids were tombs, why did they have the Valley of the Kings? Cost. Brute economics. Here's the thing. Pyramids were really, really, really expensive. Incredibly expensive. It would break the economy kind of expensive. And Egypt suffered from crippling inflation. Things cost more over time. And we do see this in grain prices. That, the cost of grain in the Old Kingdom was a lot less than by the time you get to the New Kingdom. So everything got more expensive out of the New Kingdom, and kingdoms just could not afford to build pyramids anymore. So you had the last pyramid in Egypt, built by King Ahmose I, the first king of Dynasty 18. His successor, Amenhotep I, begins the Valley of the Kings as an alternative to building a pyramid. Now, that last pyramid by Ahmose I was a really small affair. It was only like 40 feet by 40 feet by 40 feet tall. It was really small. And it's located in Abydos. But Amenhotep I, he starts the Valley of the Kings for his own tomb. Now, what makes the Valley of the Kings so special is it's in the shadow of a natural pyramid. There's a mountain there that looks like a pyramid. It's a natural mountain. It's kind of got flattish sides, so it looks like a pyramid. So in a sense, every king in the Valley of the Kings was also buried in the shadow of a big pyramid. But the tombs also in Valley of the Kings had their rock-cut tombs that were cut into the side of the mountain, in the side of the wadi. But there was also shrines built in front of those tombs. And on each of those shrines, it was a little temple shrine in front of those tombs, with a little pyramid on top. So we find several of these little pyramidions, and a pyramidion is a capstone for a pyramid. The Egyptians called this the Ben stone. So we find these Ben stones scattered through the Valley of the Kings, and they belong to those little chapels that were in front of each king's tomb. Now, In some cases, I mean, most cases, none of those chapels survive. We have an example of one of those chapels actually in Deir al-Medina that belonged to one of the administrators there. But that's the only chapel that we know from that area that actually survived of those tomb chapels. So we do have an idea of what those chapels looked like, and we know that there were several of them constructed in the Valley of the Kings. But really, it came down to this cost. Money. It was a lot less expensive to create a rock-cut tomb than it was to create a pyramid. And a lot faster. Let's keep that in mind. A lot of kings did not live to see the completion of their pyramids. Like, for example, Jedefre. He only reigned a few years, and he started off creating another step pyramid like King Zoser's, but only got to the first level. So when he died, they just had to chuck him into the sarcophagus and hope for the best. Because once you, as a king, you were dead, there was no one going to finish your pyramid for you. And pyramids, depending on how big you wanted them, could be a 30, 35-year project. So, that said, the last pyramid, beginning of Dynasty 18, with the first king of Dynasty 18, after that they all go to rock-cut tombs, or they're buried under the foundations of the temples, like we find with in Tanis. We find a lot of kings that were buried underneath the foundations of, say, the Temple of Tanis, too. Like some of the Shoshanks were buried there. So, it just after that, it just came down to pure economics. It was just more economical to bury in some ways than others. And frankly, even eventually, the rock-cut tombs got too expensive, and that's why they started burying kings under the foundations of temples, because that was less expensive again than burying a king, say, in a rock-cut tomb. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. It's a very interesting question. Thank you very much for that question. Do see we have another super chat. Tony G for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Besides Exodus, what Bible stories would you love to see depicted on film and be consultant on? Ooh. Oh, I like that question. I'd hate to be a consultant on a film. I hate being consultants for films. A producer maybe would, but then you're king. It's good to be king.
That's what I said. You need to be the producer.
Okay. I'll tell you what I'd love to do. Love to do this one. I'd love to do the story of King David. There's so much juicy detail that you could do with King David. Architecture. You could do just some interesting architecture. You could do the whole Goliath and him versus Goliath scene in the traditional armor, in the real armor, in that heavy bronze iron armor. We have like a 6-foot sword from the Levant in the British Museum, which would have been very similar to Goliath's swords, and that big, husky, slab of bronze, as it were. So I'd love to do, be a consultant on, say, a film for King David. I would love to do, say, the conquest, the early conquest of the Israelites. That would also be a great story to do. I'd like to do one on Joseph. Now, there's one that's juicy. All that rich Egyptian detail. Oh, that would be sweet. Portray the whole rise of the Hyksos. The introduction of the chariot. The early days of the city of Avaris. Oh, the details you could do on that would just be fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. I doubt I'll ever get to do it. Um, I think it'd be very interesting to do. I think it'd also be I'd go bald from pulling my hair out because Hollywood does not listen to its consultants. It just wants them there. So, um, yeah, I'd like to do something on Joseph that wasn't a cartoonish musical. Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, or Disney's version of it. Yeah, I'd love to do something on Joseph that wasn't cartoonish. That really showed, say, Semitic garb. You know, not garb that looked like they just walked off of a Bedouin caravan. You know, but garb as it would have actually been in the Bronze Age. So, yeah, there's a lot I think are interesting stories that could have been done better, much better. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Everyone wants to make me to torment me by making me a movie producer or a movie consultant tonight, but I do still appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Camel leopard. So no dancing vegetables? No. Sorry. No dancing vegetables. Sorry, Veggie Tales. Oh. Oh, Veggie Tales, the despoilers of good theology and history everywhere. Oh, hurts. Okay. Professional work, and I still don't know what that unit of currency is. If anyone knows what unit of currency is, could you put that in the live stream? Because I'm really curious to know. So at least I think was that Singapore, but I don't know. So anyway, whatever that currency is, 100 of that. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. And he asks, or she, I don't know which. There's no gender here for professional work. 1 Samuel 16:14. What does it mean? An evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Did the Lord allow evil spirit to hurt Saul? Thank you very much. Yes, he did. Now, let's get that up here. 1 Samuel. Again here, context matters. I want to make that perfectly clear here as we get into this. Context is everything. Now, it says here, now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and this is starting verse 14, and an evil spirit from the Lord terrorized him. And Saul's servant said, behold, an evil spirit from God is terrorizing you. Okay, now, we do have a second account of this. I hope I can find it, because that actually tells us a lot more of what's going on. Is it in Chronicles? Okay. Can't find it. I might be confusing it with another account as well. There is another account. Maybe it's Ahab. There's another account where the Lord asks for a spirit. do do one final look. Just maybe I can still find it. We talked about this particular passage last week. See if I can. Yes, here it is. 1 Kings 22:21. And it is talking about Ahab. And the Lord said, "Who will entice Ahab to go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" And one said this, while another said that. Essentially, the spirits are debating. Yeah, apparently the spirits are big debaters. Rather than verse 21. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, "I will entice him." And verse 22. The Lord said to him, "How?" And he said, "I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And he said, "You are to entice him and also prevail. Go and do so." Okay. We talked about this a little last week where, say, I'll get back to our original passage here. There's something called primary and secondary causes, where primary cause, God does something by fiat. He commands something to happen, and it happens. There's also a secondary cause, where the cause of the evil action is not necessarily God himself, but he has oversight over it, or has sovereignty over it. He permits it. In the case of evil spirits, what seems to happen is God calls for volunteers amongst, say, the evil spirits. Now, this is starting to get into, say, sort of the more spiritual aspects of, say, the divine council of the gods. That the divine council not only has, say, good spirits, but also has bad spirits too. And God will call upon, bad spirits to volunteer. Hey, you want to go do this bad thing? You want to torment this human? Here's your opportunity. I'm not going to get in your way. And a bad spirit will volunteer, an evil spirit will volunteer, and the Lord will say, "Hey, okay, my protection's off him. Go for it." And I think that's what's happening here in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 14. Verse 14 says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord terrorized him." Now, the "from the Lord" here is one of those imprecise things. Is it at the Lord's behest? Is it with the Lord's permission? Did the Lord call for volunteers like he did in the 1 Kings 22 passage? So that's what I think is going on here. Is there's a secondary agency happening here where the Lord is providing the opportunity, but he's not the actual actor here. He's not the person who's doing the terrorism. We do see this. We do see this where God does bring bad people to affect his will. Like, for example, the Assyrians. When the northern kingdom of Israel is punished for its sins, God has raised up the Assyrians to be the instrument of his judgment. That doesn't excuse the bad acts of the Assyrians. But God is allowing the Assyrians to rise up, get powerful, and be the instrument of his judgment. The Assyrians are, in a sense, volunteering to fill a role. And, these roles are voluntary. No spirit has to say, "Yeah, I want to go torment this human being." They're getting their jollies out of it. So, it's one of those situations where, the Lord allowed the evil spirit to hurt Saul. But Saul left first. Saul So we know about Saul's disobedience. It is we find it throughout the scriptures. So there's no question. There's no um, there's no reason to suspect that the Lord departing from Saul was justified. He consulted. Did things in a way that God did not approve of. So, with that said, that's what's here is going on here is it is an evil spirit. It's probably one of the members of the divine council who's getting his jollies here, and it's done basically on a volunteer basis. God's removed his spirit, removed his protection, and said, "Here's the opportunity. If you want, go do it." And these, these evil spirits love doing it. They love tormenting human beings. So yeah, it's like, okay, I got permission to do it. I'm going for it. So, that's what's going on in this passage. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. As it's a great question. It's a question we get. We don't get it often, but we do get it sometimes on this channel. We've had it now, I think, 3 times, but in different ways. Like last time, it was talking about the lying spirit in 1 Kings 22. But we do get this question on occasion. It does cause people some concern. How can God send a lying spirit or an evil spirit to torment? Well, because he calls for volunteers, essentially. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one more question because we are at 11 o'clock now. We've gone for 3 hours. I know, all good things have to come to an end eventually. And I am starting to get hoarse. So, I am going to take one more, and then we're going to call it a night. Start more from the beginning here. I'm not going to dignify with that one with an answer. RG strategy. No, we're not going to do a 12-hour stream. I don't have the endurance of Rob Rowe and Sentinel Apologetics. I can't just keep going on for hours, for all day. I know you all want a 12-hour live stream. Not happening. Not happening. I do not have that kind of endurance. One more. Maybe we don't have one more. At least not one more. I'm interested. Oh, I think we might have covered everything I want to cover. Oh, 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 that's bad. I'm gonna put this one on by Jamie Russell. Oh. Ixos? Ooh. Bad pun. Ashra, no. I think we're out of questions. So, okay. Actually, that is actually a pretty good question. Okay, we have actually, we're going to make the final question tonight from my wife, the producer of this Q&A. She actually has a good question. Are you going to type that in? Yep. All right. All right, well, she asked the question, her question is, what do I think about the harm that Hollywood has done to the Bible? And I think that Hollywood has done a fair bit of harm to the Bible. In the attempts to sensationalize the Bible, to make it interesting, they don't dig deep into the text. They result to CGI. What they know of, say, other productions. Like, for example, I think one of the most harmful movies has actually been the most recent one on Noah. That had almost nothing to do with Noah. The quote, Nephilim looked like tree ants. You had Lamech as Gandalf. You had magical pebbles. You had the sons of Cain as the orcs. I mean, all you really needed was hobbits, and that Noah film would have been a ripoff of the Lord of the Rings. I mean, it was essentially all the same special effects, all the same tropes. It was, it was terrible. And what I think is why it's so bad is you do get pastors that will take clips from a lot of these films, show them in their churches, and say, hey, this is part of the scriptures, and then do their sermon from there. They use it as a way to entice people into their Sunday messages. It's actually creating a message of entertainment, not a message of teaching. And I think that our churches need to get back to healthy teaching. Good expository preaching. I cannot remember the last time I heard a good expository sermon. I mean, it's been that long. Cannot remember the last time. Might be back a decade ago. Last time I heard a really, really good expository sermon. It's a lost art. It's a lost art, and this is one of the reasons why the church in America has gotten so weak, is we've drifted away from expository teaching and into entertainment. There's a saying, entertainment catechizes. It teaches morality. It teaches ethics and knowledge. A lot of people get their knowledge from what they see in the films. This is why what Hollywood says about the Bible is so dangerous, because they don't know what the Bible is. To basically say this, when I worked in the visual effects industry, I was in the break room, and I overheard a couple of guys talking about Christianity. And one guy said, I just don't get Christianity. And the other guy goes, oh, I understand Christianity. It's about Jesus Christ saving people from the dinosaurs. He wasn't joking. He wasn't joking. That's what he believed Christianity was. God, Jesus saving humanity from the dinosaurs. Wow. Those are the people who are making films about the Bible. Okay? Those are the people making the films. That's their level of understanding. This is why almost every film on the Bible sucks. Because you've got people who have never walked into a church, opened a Bible, who can't be bothered to read a Bible, doing movies about the Bible. And then pastors preach from them. It's no wonder we're in a mess. It is no wonder that our culture is in a complete bankrupt mess. Because that's what's guiding our culture. That's what's guiding our churches. We don't sit kids down into normal Sunday schools anymore and teach them, say, the stories of from the Old Testament. We throw a VeggieTales tape in the cassette and in the DVD and let it go. I had there's a teenager I talked to, been in church all his life. And he goes to me, I asked, I'll say, well, King David. Who's King David? Who's Daniel? He has no knowledge of the Bible. Been in church all his life. No clue of what in the past would have been, just taken for granted. It's terrifying. We're not getting kids at an age where they're taught and teachable and will remember this stuff for life. So it's going to be harder when they have to start, trying to figure out the Bible as an adult. It's going to be 10,000 times more difficult. They say right now the chance of a high schooler now hearing the gospel is about half of 1%. That's sort of the probability now of a high schooler, from a child all the way up to the time they graduate to hear the gospel. It's just terrible. It's just a really shocking state of affairs, and it's cultural. It's found in our churches. I mean, it's found from basically the bottom all the way up to the top. So it's systemic. It's not even centralized. It's not just that the laity don't know. It's that the clergy don't know either anymore. And it's a sad state of affairs, and if we don't turn this around, it's already having catastrophic results. The results of this, we see the results of this everywhere. And I think it's just terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And frankly, it's not just Hollywood. We can't just put the blame here on Hollywood. The blame also goes with our churches too. Our churches and our pastors and the laity that put those pastors into the pulpit. I've seen too many pastoral search committees look for the buddy who can talk sports but can't preach a sermon. The used car salesman. Quite literally. I have read church resumes, pastoral resumes, that where their previous job was actually, car salesman at a car lot. And frankly, they got along great with the pastoral search committee. And that's the terrifying thing. Did not matter what their theology was. Did not matter if they could preach. It did matter how they got along, though, at the church barbecue. So, anyway, I hope that answered the question. It's a multifaceted problem. It's not just Hollywood, but Hollywood's contributing fact. It is a contributing factor. It's a bigger problem. Okay, I saw one more super chat, and then that'll be a night. Just want to thank him for professional work, and he says the unit of for 100 rupees. Well, thank you, professional work. I very much appreciate it. 100 rupees. Thank you very much for answering my question. Well, it's my pleasure. And thank you for answering my question on that unit of currency. So it's really cool that we're reaching people in India. Last week we had someone from Japan. It's just amazing what a multicultural audience we are attracting on this channel. It just thrills us. It absolutely thrills us to be able to reach so many different nations, and how truly international this is, and how it's appealing to such a broad base of people. So thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for responding. That was very, very interesting, and have a great night. So with that said, we are going to call it a night. I want to thank everyone for coming out and joining us tonight and being with us. I want to thank all the people who gave super chats tonight. You guys really keep this channel going. Most of our funding does come from super chats, and we really, really appreciate your helping us support this channel. We also want to thank our Patreon subscribers who don't get nearly enough recognition for what they do. They help us upgrade our equipment when it breaks, which is all too often, unfortunately. But we are very, very appreciative to all our Patreon supporters and so grateful for what they do. Also want to thank our regular subscribers who actually watch our videos and leave comments and likes and dislikes. Yes, even the dislikes help. And because they feed the YouTube algorithm, and that gives our videos traction. So anyway, with that said, you all have a great night. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night.